Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the She Runs Strong podcast, powered by Coach Parry with Nicky and Shona. Nicky, it's so funny. I have a funny story for you. The other day, I was sitting having coffee with a friend of mine, and I asked her how she slept the night before. She's busy training, and she went like this. Yeah, it says I slept quite well, actually. And I thought that was so funny how she looked at her watch when I asked her a question about how she slept. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like that before.
Oh, brilliant. That's really good. Hey, so yeah, same thing. It's really funny you should say that today, but last night I had a terrible night's sleep. It was awful. And I normally sleep quite well, and I always just check my watch in the morning or the metrics on my watch. And it said that I'd slept really well and I was good to go for the day and I was training ready. And I can tell you I'm not. I'm a wee bit bleary-eyed today. This is why I'm wearing my cap so it covers my eyes. And I think a lot of us are becoming a little bit reliant on our watches.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. And that's what we want to speak about today, guys. We want to go into the different metrics your watches provide you. Are they useful? Are they reliable? How are they going to help your training? And so we've got a guest with us today who's going to do this, and he's going to talk us through a lot of these things. So I'm going to bring Ntutu Letseka on to the stage with us. And Ntutu, how are you doing?
Good morning, guys, and thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing it and sharing your expertise. Let me just give you guys a brief intro as to who Ntutu is. So he's one of the coaches here at CoachParry.com. He's actually trained as a molecular biologist. Okay, so very, very clever. Has a keen interest in exercise physiology, all things tech and data. And really, Ntutu's our go-to guy when it comes to tech and data within the Coach Parry team. If we have questions, we'd go straight to Ntutu. So we asked him to come and share his knowledge today.
You love your tech and data. I mean, certainly I love my tech and data, but I think you take it to a different level, Ntutu. And definitely if I have a query about Garmin that's quite specific or running watches, you're often the guy, dude, that I ask. Yes. So.
Yeah. No, definitely.
And it's quite interesting because everyone at the moment is using a lot of these devices, and it's quite interesting to also know what people that we work with, that we coach, are using. And I think it's important to stay abreast of what's going on and to just keep up and to also learn as well. It's an opportunity for us to learn about what people are doing out there, what they're using, and what's coming out.
Exactly. No, that's exactly it. I mean, we were having a little chuckle before we started here today around Nicky. You said that when you started running, and I'm not meaning this in an offensive way at all, but you said that when you started running, they weren't watches, and that's not even that long. I mean, that long ago. No. We said in a previous podcast that you ran your first marathon a couple of years ago, or 20 or 18 years ago.
15, 16. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, when I was running in my 20s, well, I didn't even use watches at all. But then when I came back to it kind of after I'd had a few babies, I mean, I didn't have a watch. I mean, you're going to laugh, but I used to get some string and measure out the string on an ordnance survey map and then use the scale to work out my routes. And of course I had just like a regular timing watch, so I would time the run. But no, we didn't. And the Garmin's, I remember, the running watches. I keep saying Garmin's because they're my favorite ones that I've always used. I've tried a few others, but I've always come back to Garmin's. But running watches, I remember when they first came out and I was thinking, that's amazing. And now, I mean, we're so far more advanced from that now, really. That we're just miles on with heart rate sensors and stuff. But yeah, so I mean, back in the days, I just didn't really have a watch. It was just a simple timer. You went out, ran for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and hoped that it was roughly 5 miles, 6 miles, whatever. So
I bet that, they've even changed so much in the last couple of years.
Hugely changed. All the metrics you can get now are, I would sort of argue, maybe a little bit over complex, but
that's exactly what we want to go in today. So yeah, definitely, that's why we've got Ntutu here. But Ntutu, your first watch, how long ago was that?
That's quite, so when I started, it was about in 2011. I used to use my phone, actually, because the phones obviously had GPS chips because they had all the maps and stuff. So you could just load an app. And I used to use an app called Endomondo, which used to give you nice verbal cues and tell you you're running too fast, you're running too slow, start the next rep, and you had your earphones on and you'd run, which is also not a good thing to be doing. And then I actually had a foot pod. My dad had a foot pod that he loaned to me, and you could just sort of calibrate it for the run. It wasn't very useful because your stride changes when you run faster or slower. And then I got one of those big triathlon watches, the big orange ones that looked like, you had a big computer in your hand. People used to joke, how do you run with that thing on your hand? Exactly. And I mean, that thing was pretty awesome in 2012. It had GPS, it had pace, it could do all this stuff.
Yeah.
But as Nicky said, they've just shifted so dramatically over the years. I mean, I remember, I think it was in 2015, when the first watch with a heart rate, a wrist-based sensor came out. And I saw this and I'm like, I've got to have that. And so I went and dished my perfectly good watch for no reason and went and bought this watch with a heart rate sensor on the wrist. And let me tell you, it was one of the worst purchase decisions ever. Also, I'm the guy who buys tech, like, I'm an early adopter. I like to buy stuff when it first comes out. And these things were not ready for the mainstream. They did a little bit of the job. But of course, over the years, that was in 2015. And now in 2024, 2025, they're ubiquitous. Every watch has a wrist-based sensor. Now they're doing all of the things they're working on VO2 max, they're working on power, they're doing your sleep and everything without using a strap. So it's really amazing how from 2012, 2015, and now 2025, it's a completely changed landscape. And I suppose that's why we're here, to just talk through what you find on these devices, and is any of it actually useful for you as a runner?
No, exactly. And so, we'll jump straight in. So I want to start with that VO2 max one, because that's a question we get very often. But let me just say this, guys, as a disclaimer. The three of us are all quite Garmin fans, okay? And that's not for any other reason, that's just a personal preference. And so, I know Nicky and I sometimes interchangeably use the word your Garmin as opposed to your wearable device. That's not to say that the other watches also don't have these features. Most of the watches do have very similar battery of features that they use, but they might use different algorithms. Okay. But essentially the principles of what we want to focus on today is what's important. Okay. So really, really thinking about how those affect your training, or if they should, and how we should read into them. Okay. So just wanted to mention that up front as well. So, and Ntutu, let's start with that, with the VO2 max, if you don't mind. I mean, we get that question so often in the Coach Parry forum, either, is my VO2 accurate from my watch? Or even worse, we get questions where people are saying, my VO2 is going down, but I'm training. Why is this happening? So talk us through the VO2 max and how it works that out, essentially.
I mean, so obviously in the real world, when you're doing your actual VO2 max, you've got to go to a lab. And I mean, I've done a VO2 max test for Coach Parry. We did a video on this in 2023. And you've got a little contraption on your face, and they actually measure how much oxygen you take and the amount of carbon dioxide you breathe out. So the watches don't have access to that environment. And what they're doing is they're doing sub-threshold testing. And essentially what you do is you go out for a run, and it needs to have an accurate GPS signal. So if GPS signal is poor, it can't work, and you need good heart rate data. And then what it does is it basically compares your speed and heart rate. And the idea that, if you read their white paper, is that whether you're running a 5-minute K or a 6-minute K or whatever, essentially we'll all use the same amount of oxygen to move a body at that speed. Okay. So what it does is it says, okay, at 5 minutes per K, most people will be using X amount of oxygen. And then it uses your heart rate to figure out what the intensity that speed correlates to. So you need to have an accurate heart rate maximum on your device. And they also incorporate minimum heart rate, but not so much. But the heart rate max is very, very important. So that's the first pitfall, is your heart rate max accurate? If it's not accurate, the calculation falls apart. And then what it does is, as you progress through the run, it takes at least 30-second segments and up to 10 minutes. You've got to be running at least 70% of your maximum heart rate for it to be accurate. And it extrapolates from that what your VO2 max is. So it is an estimate based on sub-threshold running, converting your speed at heart rate to what it estimates VO2 is, and then taking that and saying, this is your VO2 max. So it's quite a lot of steps that it needs to estimate a lab reading. And this is where we find that things get a little bit weird for people. Heart rate isn't set up properly. They are not using a chest strap, and they're using the wrist sensor, which we know sometimes can be a little bit off. So if any of those things are off, if the GPS drops out during a run, and also it doesn't know if it's hot, if it's windy, if you're running up a hill, if you slept well. So there's a lot of things happening with these calculations. So that's essentially a summary of what it does. And and we find that for most people, it tends to favor high intensity work. So these devices, because they're based on the intensity you run, if you do more high intensity work, you tend to get better results. And if you do low intensity work, it tells you you're not improving. And the idea is that VO2 max is maximum oxygen uptake. So the idea is that you would need to run hard to improve it. So it seems to penalize easy running, if you will.
Absolutely. Sorry, Nicky. Yeah. Because that's what we've seen with the people doing perhaps, MAF plans, which are heart rate based plans, where they're keeping their heart rate at a, kind of lowish level. Yeah, the VO2 goes down. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense with that. Nicky, did you want to?
So the takeaways I take from that is to get the most accurate reading, you need to wear your heart rate strap for any running that you do, especially the high intensity that you do. But you also need to know your max heart rate, which is really quite difficult to get, even in a guesstimate. But even with a heart rate strap, is that hard to get then?
I mean, the watches will try. They now try and estimate onboard heart rate max, which again, I'm not sure about the utility of those things. And of course, the default is the age-based formula, which I think is 220 minus age, or there's one which is 207, and it's some factor. But all of these things aren't accurate. Heart rate is a very individual number, and we tend to see that older people tend to have lower heart rates than younger people. And there is some male-female differences, but for the most part, we are individuals. So you can't just use an arbitrary age-based formula to work out your heart rate. You actually need to go out and do a test. And that, again, comes back to doing a lab test or doing a field test. And these are very, very hard tests. And most people actually can't push themselves hard enough, especially when you're not fit. It's very difficult when you're unfit to push yourself that hard anyway. So that is I think is the biggest pitfall with the VO2 max calculation, is that starting point, your heart rate max, which is what is used to determine the relative intensity of your runs, to then extrapolate your VO2 max. If that's wrong, everything else is off.
And yeah, you spot it. I mean, we just see it, especially for females over the age of 45, over 50, that heart rate max becomes less and less of a reliable, sort of metrics or number to use within these calculations anyways. And the only way you get those reliable readings is, as Ntutu says, through a lab test, at which even then in a lab environment they probably won't even call it your heart rate max, as Ntutu says, they call it your heart rate, your peak heart rate. So again, from the get-go, the information going in is not going to give us a reliable reading. But yeah, sorry, Ntutu, you were going to say?
So the other thing is also, you got to be careful. Does VO2 max actually tell you anything about your performance? Because you're training to run a 5K, a 10K, a marathon. If my VO2 max is whatever, 50, does that tell me anything about how I'm going to run in my, I've got a 10 miler coming up in February. Does my VO2 max tell me anything about my performance? A 5K time trial is more informative for me about how fast I'm going to run in 4 weeks' time than a number on a watch, because that VO2 max, I mean, I've never been able to gather any meaning from that. So be very careful about what these things mean. And it's nice to see the number go up or go down or whatever, or you don't want to see it go down, but you want to see it go up. Yeah. But does it actually translate to an actionable performance on race day?
Does it give you a trend? Yeah.
Does it give you a trend? And I think that's exactly, I mean, when we were at when I was working at the university and we were in that sports science lab and we were doing these VO2 max tests, which are accurate breath by breath analysis, even then, knowing that number doesn't help your training. What we would then do from that is then obviously work out people's training zones based on the different, anaerobic or aerobic threshold sort of aspects. So yeah, I agree with you, and thank you for raising that point. I think that is the key point, is that having a higher VO2 max does not necessarily mean you and Kipchoge are going to go toe to toe on race day. So definitely, I think that's a key aspect. And yeah, so a couple of the other things we get asked about often is things like the training readiness or the body battery, or I guess any kind of metric that's helping us decide whether or not we are recovered and ready. I mean, and your view on some of those, and you can pick whichever ones you want, because obviously there's different ones across the watch.
Yeah, so one of the interesting ones is, there's a couple that I want to pick on. So you get the training readiness, which I think is in a lot of the newer watches, and this is quite interesting because it's this idea that you're using your device to figure out if you're able to go out and do a run. So training readiness takes into account your sleep score, and then it takes into account, after a run, you see it says recovery time, how much time it'll be 24 hours, 48 hours. So it takes your sleep score, recovery time. The watches now do training load. So essentially acute training load, and try and figure out how much you're training. And it incorporates that plus HRV and then sleep and stress history together, and puts that as one big variable and says, based on this, and your training load from before. Are you ready to do a hard session today, tomorrow, or the next day? And so if you, all the things I mentioned, sleep score, recovery time, training load, HRV, we've got to be very, very careful about, are these things actually sort of real things? You know what I mean? Like, so sleep is a real thing. As Nicky mentioned, you go to sleep, you can measure sleep, but the watch is not measuring sleep. It's estimating sleep based on your movement or, you know, heart rate and that sort of thing. And then is stress. What is stress? Like, how is Garmin measuring stress? So not Garmin, how are these manufacturers measuring stress? So training readiness is not a real variable. It's a composite variable that they've designed, incorporating all the inputs from all the things it's tracking, and then saying, okay, are you ready to train? And a lot of these things, like heart rate is real, HRV is real, pace is real, but then we start moving to these proprietary algorithms that then are trying to tell you a little bit more. And in some ways, we have to learn to figure out, like, be able to assess ourselves. Like, Nicky, you woke up this morning, your watch said you slept well. You know you didn't sleep well. You're not going to override your own sensation because your watch said you slept well. Yeah. And we've got to be very, very careful in looking at these compound variables that these companies have designed and say, are they actually meaningful?
I mean, in theory, that training readiness, pulling all those factors sounds quite good. You know, just because that is what we're trying to tune into our body to do, and to have something that's maybe taking some metrics and doing it for us is quite interesting. And I suppose the question is, how is it getting it right or not? You know, and I'm interested to know. I'm going to have a look at my training readiness now as well for today, given that sleep. And actually, yeah, it says it's high for me today. I'm ready to go. I'm not ready to go at all.
And that makes sense, because sleep is a key component of that variable. So if your sleep score today is good and your sleep history is good, it obviously thinks that you are primed for performance. But obviously something must have gone strange with the readings overnight. I mean, and because of your watch, are you wearing your watch on tightly? The sensor. I mean,
well, that's the interesting thing. I'm wondering if my watch was loose last night or something. I don't know. You know, I'm quite good when I don't sleep to just lie and rest. I don't tend to fidget too much. So maybe it's just picked up my breathing and the calmness of just kind of lying there. But it's interesting to sort of see with the training readiness. I like the fact that it's taking all that data and trying to sort of absorb it and give us a reading. But yes, it's not quite right for me today, certainly, that's for sure. So again, I suppose, but we can't wear a heart rate strap all the time either. So, you know, that would be the answer, wouldn't it?
It's a big challenge, as you said, because the strap is a hindrance for a lot of these things. And I think that's part of why they are moving a lot of these metrics onto the wrist-based sensor. And they do validation studies. I know I've read a lot of studies that say that for overnight, so at rest, the wrist sensor is actually not that bad. So as long as it struggles with variation. So if, like with interval training, for example, if you go to the track and do interval training, the wrist sensor struggles to pick up changes up and down the spectrum. But when you're sleeping, you're working in a very narrow range. So the heart rate tends to be a little bit more stable. And it's also then estimating it, because the wrist sensor can't measure HRV. HRV is it's an electrical signal. So it's estimating HRV using their algorithms. And it seems to be somewhat accurate for overnight readings. So, which is why you can spot the trends with long-term HRV, long-term sleep data, but on a point-to-point basis, there are going to be aberrations like what you saw last night.
Yeah. You know, Ntutu, and you said something that's quite important to me, is that, you know, around how much we use or letting these metrics, because I agree, Nicky, I love this stuff. I think the fact that they are figuring out ways to use it, I think is awesome. But I think it's a balance between using the data to really guide us and to help us make decisions, as opposed to letting it control our decisions. I mean, if you went out this morning because your watch said you were ready to go, you know, you probably wouldn't have had a great session, especially if it was supposed to be like a high intensity quality. I hate using that word for high intensity.
Yeah,
session.
I wanted to do a mini tempo session and I didn't feel ready for it at all. So do it tomorrow.
Yes, no, exactly. And that's exactly my point. So that's what I was going to say is I think, guys, the key, we're not here to bash these metrics. I know sometimes it sounds like that. We're obviously just analyzing how they are worked out. And as scientists ourselves and coaches, we obviously are very interested in how they work this stuff out, because if the data isn't reliable going in, you're not going to get a reliable reading coming out. And so I think that the point, and this will be the current thread through this whole podcast, is really utilizing the metrics to guide your decisions about your training, not letting it control, not like my friend who, I'm not going to mention her name, bless her, not like my friend who went, yes, I slept really well last night. So rather go like you, Nicky, I didn't sleep well. My watch says I did. Let me make a good decision about my training from that point onwards. So I mean, from a coaching perspective, Nicky and Ntutu, you both coaches. Yeah, that's you agree with that sort of statement, right? Getting that happen that way.
So when you speak about guiding, so I didn't mean to interrupt. When you speak about guiding training, when you move with these metrics, so we start from VO2 max, then performance indicator, training readiness. During the run, all of them have some kind of metric that tells you when you start running if you are ready. So let's say you have your training readiness. It says, okay, you're good to go. Then you start running, and now maybe on the run, it figures out that actually you're not good to go. So Garmin calls it performance indicator, and other companies will use different names. And this is in the first 5 to 10 minutes of your run. It analyzes your pace, heart rate, and HRV. Because of course, HRV tells you something about stress. And then if you are running slow, let's say, Nicky, you went out for your run this morning, and in your warm-up, you are running a lot slower at heart rate than what you're used to, and your HRV is indicating stress. That performance indicator score will be a negative value, essentially saying you're not ready to run. And if you do show good reaction to the first bit of exercise, it can be a positive number, and the range is from -20 to +20. And obviously, the higher the number, the better it is. So it's kind of moving in that way. You get your training readiness score, then you get the performance indicator score, which tells you how you are doing. And you can actually monitor it in real time throughout the run. So you can set up a data field on your watch that gives you the performance indicators throughout the run. And so as you fatigue, your performance does drop. And in a run, you should see a slight drop, but you want it to stay positive for like an easy run. But if you do a race, that thing just tanks, because of course you're draining the well, so to speak.
Yes.
And again, that's a relatively simple metric, because it's just using pace, heart rate, HRV. And in theory, it's one of those things that could actually be quite useful. And it sometimes can be telling, because obviously if you are feeling fatigued, you go out for a run and you start slow and you just feel a little bit sluggish, and that should technically show up. I've personally found it to be hit or miss. It's very bad for race day, because on race day, you are usually stressed anyways, so your numbers are a little bit wonky. Yeah. But I've had some days when it tells me like I get a +5 score, but I do a run and it's just not a great run. And I've had days when I've had like a 0 or -2, and I've just done my session anyway, and it's been good. And again, it's another thing where it's the metric is trying to, because we always tell athletes, don't ditch a session until you've had the first 15 minutes. See how you feel. Almost do a head to toe analysis, figure out how you're feeling, and then make the decision after that first 15 minutes to either do an easy run or to proceed. And then the watch is just trying to then do the same thing using data that is pulling from the device.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. And just a quick question on that, because I was super interested in that, because I've never known how it works it out. And I always look at it, I'm like, whatever, Garmin, leave me alone. Like, I'm gonna go for my ride, okay? But yeah, and so you say it uses HRV. I don't sleep with my watch, so how would it then? Is it then that number is probably even less accurate, because I don't sleep with my watch. I'm not getting an HRV measurement.
So that's the performance indicator is using measurements only in that part of the run. So it's not looking at historical data. The readiness uses historical data, and the performance indicator is using. So it's analyzing that initial block, and then obviously, then it will make decisions. But I do think it does incorporate. It must, because you have a condition going into the run. So again, there's complex crosstalk between all of these things, and we're never really sure what's feeding into what. But as far as I know, it's just that first 5 to 10 minutes. So it's not using historical data.
I could sit and pick your brain about how these things are all worked out all day, but I think if we can, I would love to ask both of you, being coaches as well, what are the things that as coaches we like to use, or you like to use? What are the meaningful ones that you utilize? So we're not, performance indicators, VO2 max. Like, what are you using? What are you looking at for your athletes in their sessions and perhaps after their sessions as well? So Ntutu, I'm going to pass that to you first, and then Nicky, please, I'd love your input there as well. If you want to recover from sessions faster, not feel tired all the time, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join me in my upcoming training specifically for female runners over the age of 45. In it, I'll share with you my simple 5-step framework that'll transform your running. Simply scan the QR code on screen now or click on the link in the description to save your seats in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
So, I like to keep things simple because I think the more, and I think, Shona, you said this to me before on previous occasions, when you have more variables to work with, metrics, you'll pick the one thing that is not telling you what you want to do and then try and sort of action that point. So you almost want to take away almost this overabundance of data and keep things as simple as possible. And for easy run days, I limit it to heart rate and pace. Simply the idea there being that pace is a shifting variable. So as you get fitter, your pace gets faster. If you've had a bad sleep, your pace slows down. If it's warm, you slow down, etc. So pace can't be the only guiding metric because it will vary day by day. And I think as athletes, we will tend to just run as fast as we can. If I give you a pace target of 5 minutes to 5:30, you run at 5 minutes per K without taking into account how you're feeling. So I like to use heart rate more as a way for sub-threshold running, as a way to guide runners and how they work. And it is very difficult, as we said, with the max heart rate and that sort of thing, to figure out what the zones are, which is why threshold heart rate is a very simple tool to use, because the research shows that a time trial of 30 minutes gives you a reasonably accurate estimate of what your threshold heart rate is and your threshold pace. So we can use that, do a quick time trial, get some heart rate data, and then set up nice training zones for people, and then just give them that zone 2 training. And then what I like to tell people to do is don't rely on the heart rate to guide you. Now, this is the learning experience. You figure out what, let's say like mine is 130 to 140, for example. I'm not just running and looking at my watch and every single second trying to keep my heart rate at 130 to 140. You learn to feel what that's like. And I should be able to go out for a run, check and see, okay, it's at 135 now, ignore it and run for an hour and come back, and my average should be 135. That's the ideal world. It's not quite that simple. So I find that's a very, very useful tool, and heart rate is a very good tool for limiting people from running too fast.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the easy run is just to keep things easy. We're not trying to hammer ourselves into the ground. So I use heart rate for general easy training as a way to regulate an athlete's intensity. So not to say you must run at this pace, but to say, this is your limit and keep it below this. And that way we're ensuring that they're recovering, because the big thing about overtraining is actually not recovering.
Exactly. Yeah. And so just want to mention there quickly is that if anyone, Ntutu spoke about threshold heart rate and pacing and so on, we've done a whole deep dive episode into pacing and working out your threshold. So go back and have a look. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was episode 2 or 3, Nicky, I can't even remember that far back, but yeah, so have a look at that. But I think that's so key as well to, have some internal metrics, your external, the ones that are reliable, like you're saying, in terms of pace, heart rate being internal. And then, of course, this isn't for today's topic, but I quite like a subjective feel, like, so stepping away from the gadgets. But yeah, Nicky, from your side, from a coaching perspective, the things that you perhaps like to look at your athletes in training?
Yeah, so not surprisingly, quite similar to Ntutu. I like heart rate as well, and I love a good 5K time trial. I feel like you can get a lot of data for that. Another metric I quite like is resting heart rate. And I would be guided a little bit by resting heart rate as well. And I do think it's quite a simple metric, but it's a really good one. And you can really see when that pops up a little bit, 5-10 beats, if someone is getting ill or under the weather. And I think that's a really good one to sort of just keep an eye on a trend over time. So that one is a good one for me as well. So I quite like using that one, as well as all the the stuff that Ntutu has spoken about there. How about you, Shona? What would you use for something like
same
that?
thing. I mean, I love resting heart rate. If an athlete is using HRV, but using it reliably, I think that's the key thing. I like looking at that. But definitely the same as you guys from heart rate and pace. And as I mentioned, that subjective feel for me is to link the three together, to not, and again, here's the current the rolling theme in this podcast is to not be driven by the data, but to really let it guide our decisions. And I mean, as coaches, that's what we really want to do as well. And, for yourself as an athlete, to really let that work for you.
I think keeping it simple is good. And from a coaching perspective as well, and this is the beauty of one-to-one coaching or face-to-face coach, whichever way, is you can really sort of see your athletes. I had an athlete on Monday, came on a coaching call, and I could visibly tell they were exhausted and tired, and I just immediately cut their week down because I could see they were just under the weather. And so, trust your instincts as well. Trust how you feel, tune into your body. And as coaches, that's what we do, is we tune into our athletes as well. And we get to know them just by talking to them and communicating and asking them how they're feeling, how's work, and all this sort of stuff. So there's that whole sort of soft touch stuff that we can do as well, on top of the metrics of resting heart rate and heart rate, pace, running as well. So I think it's a big whole package, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, Ntutu, what would you, I mean, we've had this discussion a couple of times, and we know that as an example in a session, so if you're running up a hill, you're not necessarily doing hill repeats, or if you're doing intervals, there's obviously a slight lag, right, with the heart rate. So using heart rates in an interval session as an example. I mean, I know we don't generally recommend that, but can you just explain that to everyone? Because I don't think, I think people rely so much on their heart rate, and then perhaps use that in an interval session, might not necessarily be the recommendation, right?
No, it's the big thing about these sessions, obviously, especially if you're doing hills or you're doing intervals, that you actually want to have a control session. You want to be able to hit the same intensity rep by rep, and then be able to keep that throughout. The problem with heart rate is this lag part of it. It's actually, in a way, think of it as a historical measurement. When I make a decision now to increase my effort, the watch only picks up, or the sensor picks up, that decision a second or two later. And what you find is, and because also you're recovering in between reps, your heart rate goes up and down. So what happens is people try and get to, say, their zone 5 heart rate, and they say, I'm doing 2-minute intervals in zone 5. And then they try and push very, very hard in the beginning to get up to zone 5. And they almost overextend themselves in the beginning. And then the heart rate shoots past where it's meant to go. And then they have to then do this thing of managing it to come back down and pull back up. And it's really just not a reliable, the response is just not immediate enough. And you need immediate feedback with interval sessions. Yes. And you can't be relying even on a 2 or 3 second delay. I mean, you see it if you're on an easy one, run up a hill. When you get to the top and you flatten out, your heart rate still rises for a little bit after, because it's a historical view of what you were doing. It's saying you made a decision back then, I've caught up to it now. And so heart rate becomes this battle of like trying to manage your intensity and coming down. And I find heart rates more useful in interval sessions to look at afterwards, because then you can actually see the shape of the curve matters. Because if you're doing like threshold intervals, you expect to see the same peak point at every single rep, and your recoveries must be coming down. If you aren't recovering in between reps, that tells me as a coach that you have pushed yourself too hard. You won't see it in the session, but I can look at the graph and say, oh, look at your recovery points. At this point, you've got a 140, then 145. By the end, there's no difference between your peak and your trough. And that's what matters. So for interval sessions, then this is where pace becomes a little bit more useful. Because the idea then is that we kind of are targeting a very specific goal, like it's either 5K pace, 10K pace, threshold. But something else that people have used, this experiment with using, is power. I know power is used extensively with cycling and other sports. Running, not so much, because I don't think we can really define running power. Like with a bike, you've got a power meter and you pedal and then it picks up. So like, what are you measuring with power? And everyone has their own variable for measuring power. And you actually can't compare power between different devices, because they're all different. Stride is different to Apple, is different to Garmin, is different to Polar, and so on. So it's almost like each device is specific, but so I kind of passively track power on my Garmin because it does measure power. And I do see that in intervals, I do get like an immediate response to changes in pace. Okay. So that could be a more useful tool than heart rate. Cool. But again, it comes with the same pitfalls. You need to then set everything up accurately, because we have people ask about, oh, why is my power not matching my heart rate? But have you set up your training zones? Have you done an FTP test? Because you need to have that standard to measure to, and then you can determine your training zones. But also you spoke about, Shona, about being able to feel things. And with interval training, that's where having that essence of what does this intensity feel like? Because on race day, you can't be relying on your heart rate to race and do whatever. So you need to actually learn, what does threshold feel like? If I go out for a 5K, what does it feel like? So on the day of your interval session, you're not relying on heart rate to track you. You can use your subjective feeling in combination with your pace. So I know what my 5K pace is, but I also know what the subjective feeling of a 5K is. And you try and find, I don't just run at the fastest one. If I'm running at today and it's a little bit warmer than usual, the pace will slow a bit, but the subjective feeling should still be the same. Exactly. So yeah. So just to round about, I'm saying that heart rate is not a very useful measure for interval training. It's just not. It's not a reliable thing. And also, what I find is that, for example, I ran a 10K race in the middle of Jan, and last week I did a session at 10K pace. My heart rate did not ever reach the peak I reached during the race, because that's a continuous effort. So I got up to a heart rate of 182, 183, which is like pretty high for me for my 10K race. In the session itself, I never got to more than 173, 174, because the recoveries are bringing it down. So again, understanding that you're not reproducing your race effort with intervals. You're chunking it. So your heart rate is not going to reflect the same way it would in a continuous effort. And I can't tell you what that shortfall is going to be. Is it going to be what? Are you going to reach 90% less your 10K heart rate? I don't know. So you need to then have an idea of subjective effort, and then the pace becomes a useful tool. And if you have set up power zones, they might be useful. But again, I don't know what 10K power effort is.
Yeah, but maybe over time. No, but maybe over time you might build that up for yourself as well if you were using it more often.
And that would be a little bit more reliable than the delayed and heart rate, which is not peaking. And also heart rate's affected by like hydration and carb stores and stuff. And
even the coldness. Like if it's super cold, your watch doesn't. Because remember, we did a progressive run that time and it was cold. Do you remember Ntutu? And
and your heart rate was a little bit higher than
and I had a ridiculous, we had to walk to kind of get it going, didn't we? So it was very strange. And I'm sure that was just the watch not liking the cold, me not liking the cold either.
Well, I think it's physiologically, your body's trying to keep you warm. So your heart rate is working really hard to keep you warm and you're running. It's the same thing with, I love how Nicky and I, we have this relationship. She'll talk about cold and I'll talk about heat. So the same thing goes if you're running in the heats, is that you always see that heart rate response being a little bit higher, and we always suggest people to then just slow down slightly, because don't try and just chase that heart rate. And so I think here again, we're not saying don't measure heart rates in these sessions, measure it, but it's definitely something that you shouldn't let drive your session. So if you're training in the heats, training in the cold, doing intervals, don't train to that heart rate, because it's going to throw your session off essentially, and rather use that as a post or after the fact analysis, not necessarily to let it drive your session. Sorry.
Certainly as a coach, I would look at that session afterwards and be looking for those nice drops in the heart rate, which is why I get really frustrated when my athletes just stop and start but don't lap in between. And I kind of say no, because they want the continuous run data, and I go no, lap, because actually it's the rest, the recovery, that's the really important part in the session that's giving us the information or the trends that we're looking for.
And on that note, when you get as you get fitter in a cycle, when you're close to a peak race, what you do see is that with like a VO2 max session or a 10K pace session, that those troughs become quite consistent. And when you can do a full session, and you are getting proper recovery in between the reps, that actually means you're primed and ready for your performance. That's more informative than what your peak heart rate is during the workout. The recoveries tell you so much. And also, this is why when people try and ask, what is the pace for recovery? It doesn't matter. Like, we're looking for recovery. And that's the information that we want. I don't care how fast you're running your recovery. What I care about is, are you actually seeing a recovery in your heart rate for you then to be able to then push to the next thing? Because if your recovery heart rate is too high, you're not going to be able to pace yourself properly for the next rep. You're fatiguing. And fitness is being able to resist fatigue.
Absolutely. Yep. That's a good note to end on there.
Yeah, I love that. But before we end, I want to ask another question. We're almost there. Maybe just to because Nicky, you mentioned that, like, lapping your watch, and I think maybe just a brief idea from each of you, and I'm happy to give mine as well, because I think that's important. The lapping rather than starting, guys. So if you're listening to this, like, how do you set up your watch face for your interval sessions? What are you looking at for your interval sessions on your watch face? Nicky, do you want to start with that, and then we can get into it?
Gosh, I've got about 3 watch faces. Do you know, I'm a terrible one. I do sessions with Ntutu, and actually I start my watch at the beginning when we start running, and then all I ever do is lap and lap using my lap button, and I don't look at my watch really at all, and I don't clock.
Well, that's good.
So I do the whole warm up, I do skills and drills, my watch is still running, I just do everything like that. Then I start, say 400s, and I lap, and then we go into the cool down, and I keep going, and then I download it all to my computer or phone, and then I look at the session. Then so I don't really look at the screen so much at all, whereas Tutu is quite different. He will stop and start it, and you will have it set up.
I have mine set up differently. Yeah. So, Ntutu, what about yours? And then I can give mine as well.
So I must say, one thing about Nicky, though, is because I often run sessions with her, she doesn't need to look, because she's got a really good, and I've got to say this is a compliment, Nicky, you've got a really good sense of pacing. And I think this is the skill that you want to have as an athlete, is being able to do that and know that you're going to, and when you look at the splits afterwards, they're actually very consistent, because you're just running off what you expect the session to feel like, and the data afterwards tells you something. So I'm a little bit more of a control freak, and I'm a little bit more detail oriented, but not hyper so much. But I tend to have, I have a heart rate screen and a pace screen, and what I use is the main difference that I use that most people don't use is I don't look at like current pace. I use lap pace. Because what I found is that current pace on a GPS is very, very off. It's like, it can just like, and if you run, like I run in my local park here, and there's a section that's got trees, and in that 40-meter section, no GPS signal. Like, it just, like, pace will stay the same all the way around, and then suddenly it changes again. So you can't rely on the like absolute like implicit pace, and you need to, and with lap pace it becomes more resistant to change. Also, I'm not trying to have like, I must be at this point. I want for the full 2-minute rep to average a certain pace. So I'll usually have distance, time, and then I'll have lap pace, average pace, and then last lap pace for the track, just so that I'm aware as a comparison of what I've done before. For easy runs, I remove last lap pace because I don't actually want to see that. But for the track, I do want to have the last lap pace on. And again, so I'm not monitoring pace all the time, but I am looking at, like, for the full rep, what the pace is. And so it's five field. It's a little bit messy.
Yes.
And these screens are so tiny that you almost do need to sort of
I think that's what stopped me, is I need glasses to see the screens now, so I just look afterwards.
Yeah. So, and I think there's value in both, and like looking afterwards and during. And Ntutu, I think mine and yours are very similar. So I'm not going to go into all of mine. I mean, but they're very similar. And I think, as Ntutu's saying, if you're someone who struggles to feel what pace you're running, maybe this is a good thing to do, is to put that last lap pace on for your intervals anyways, is to get an idea, because then you can look down, and I have last lap pace when I'm running hills or intervals as well. And it's always nice to go, okay, that felt like whatever, 45 seconds or whatever, 4 minutes a K or whatever the case is. And then you look and you're like, oh, okay, it was. And then so you learn more about how you're feeling. So I think if that is something you struggle with, I'd highly recommend doing that and utilizing these metrics to help you make those kinds of decisions. But all right, guys, that is all we really have time for today. Literally could have Ntutu on, and we probably will have him on again. And essentially being our first male guest on the show. So thank you for that. That was very, very cool. We are excited about that. Yeah, and Ntutu, any last sort of thoughts from you that you want to leave everyone with on this topic?
I mean, I think ultimately, it's been a theme, and I'm just going to reiterate the theme that with all of this information, the idea is don't be a slave to the information. Like, ultimately, we understand ourselves better than a device can, but you can use the device to like almost optimize. So use it for control and to, like I said, in easy run days, use your heart rate to make sure that you're not running too fast. But don't become a person who cannot do anything without the device, because then it's going to make you less trusting of yourself and you won't improve as an athlete. If you want to become the best athlete you can be, be more like Nicky and be able to feel your way through a long training session. And that's the idea that we want to get you to. And running is a skill. It really is. I know people think you just put one foot in front of the other, but it is a thing that you can action and learn how to do all these things, and you'll race better for it. Because ultimately, if you are looking to run races, marathon season coming up, these skills will help you just become a better athlete and be more in control of your performances. And once you've got that dialed down, the sky's the limit for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I agree with that, and I'm going to just echo that and not add to it, because I think that's perfect. But so use your metrics as a guide and don't let it lead you. Thank you so much, Ntutu, for your time and your expertise here. Really, really appreciate it. And Nicky, yes, I'll see you again next week, and we'll be back then.
Great, thanks, Ntutu. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Bye.